Guys, happy new year. It's John with National Sports Entertainment, and it's the final week of the NFL season. Same, you know, timed up perfectly with The Rock returning to SmackDown, so you can see both entities are amping it up heading into their respective championships. So, I think this year there's going to be a ton of shenanigans and just nonsensical displays as far as the playoffs go, the rivalries, all these different things. So what I wanted to do is go into a couple games that I like, and some of these games I think the line's definitely going to move. For example, this Houston line, maybe I'm just being naive, but I just can't imagine they're going to stick Gardner Minshew in the playoffs after this amazing story from CJ Stroud. So to me, this game here just feels like such a lock. Now, the Texans is an interesting one because we got the Steelers who play before them, and they're kind of playing for the division at the same time playing for the wild card berth. So again, you can see how all these games are essentially contingent off of each other. I do think the Jags are going to find a way. I believe, I could be wrong, and I don't really think it matters who wins the division anyway. But I think if they both win, the Texans and the Jags take the division, but the Texans would take the 7th seed if they win and Pittsburgh wins. So, before I got ahead of myself, we have the Steelers at the Ravens, and I do think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to win. I think, there's a reason they're 3.5-point favorites. They can just have Baltimore sit their stars out, and I don't think people are going to be necessarily on Pittsburgh. Tomlin already got his winning season streak continued, so it does make me worry a little bit. I don't have the Steelers making the playoffs. I don't think a team with no quarterback is going to be in the playoffs. I think the only exception is going to be the Browns, and you can see the love that Flacco's getting, so he's not exactly a nobody. So we got the Steelers, and I think it just makes perfect sense for them to win because, again, then the Texans absolutely have to win in order to get a playoff berth, where I think they could get one with a Steelers loss if other teams lose. It just puts more at stake, so I don't see why they would eliminate Pittsburgh immediately. I think they would keep it up in the open until the Texans play the Colts, and then we have the Jags playing in some other games. So for this play, I like Pittsburgh to win. The question comes down to if I like them to cover, and I do. You can see it basically has moved a little bit since opening. Pittsburgh has a bunch of close games, but the way Baltimore's been rolling over people, I do think that it would stand to reason that Pittsburgh, if you just look at these last 5 games, they could just have Baltimore, finish the season strong. I could see that. But I think having Pittsburgh again, especially against probably a lot of backups, it just stands to reason they're going to have Pittsburgh win this game and cover. Next game, again, it's one of them I jumped on board with pretty early. So I was not one of the people who saw the Texans making the playoffs. I can make that claim for some teams. Like, okay, I called the Rams pretty early. I've got the Lions, of course. And, of course, we missed a few. But I just didn't see the Texans doing it. I really looked at the beginning of the year. I don't know why. I thought they were going to push Bryce. I knew it wasn't going to be Richardson because they never push dual-threat quarterbacks immediately. They just kind of push them to a certain extent, but they don't go much further. And then your system quarterbacks will get typically your off the get-go pushes, and I genuinely thought that was going to be reserved for Bryce. But it is interesting because I've gone into this before. It does seem like they balance what happens with these quarterbacks. So it's like one quarterback will get the Heisman, one quarterback will get the number 1 pick distinction, and one quarterback will be good. It's not always the case, but I remember when they had the 4 quarterbacks come up a while back. It was like Big Ben, Rivers, Eli. They did it, even though they weren't the same class, I don't think, with Brady and Manning, obviously. But they always just seem to have, like, the one quarterback. The quarterback that gets the first overall pick usually gets a different distinction than your Heisman, than your Rookie of the Year, etc. So we have seen the 3 different quarterbacks. The first overall pick obviously has had a much different fate than the other 2 quarterbacks. So I'm sure, and this is one of the cases where I actually think Richardson really got hurt. Because I'm sure at the beginning of the year, they couldn't wait to have C.J. Stroud go up against Richardson in Week 18 of the NFL. I mean, that one writes itself. So I genuinely think that I don't think they wanted Minshew. You know, guy looks like the third young buck over here. Every time I see him, I just think of Matt Jackson. But I just don't think people are going to. Anyone's going to be interested in the Colts. I just don't see it. The Texans have the exact same story, except they have a draw in C.J. Stroud. So, again, I'm sure at the beginning of the year they probably wanted this to be Stroud versus Richardson. Just stands to reason. So that could have definitely been a real injury, but the Texans making the playoffs just makes sense on so many more levels than the Colts. So I absolutely love the Texans to win that game. And continuing the AFC South, I do think the Jags are going to win. Do they cover? I'm going to say yes, they do. Finish the season pretty strong. And it'll be the Jags and Texans from the AFC South that make it in. That's just my opinion. And then, of course, the rest are going to be the Browns, the Ravens, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Dolphins. So those are my picks from the East. I more so wanted to cover some divisions. So I'll be looking over the NFC side, of course. We'll be covering them. But as far as the AFC side, like I said, Steelers, I think they cover. Texans cover. I think the Browns is a close one. Again, I think they're getting in the playoffs either way. I don't know. I think the Bengals are eliminated, so a win doesn't make sense. But again, giving up 6 points, most likely because the Browns are going to be resting a bunch of guys. I think it gives the Bengals an excuse to cover. So I like the Bengals on the cover here. And some of these games just don't matter. Jets, Patriots. We'll be going into that. Like I said, I more so was looking at the outliers or the teams left in the divisions is the AFC North and AFC South. And yeah, I don't think we're going to get any crazy surprises as far as that goes. Jags, yeah, I think they win and cover. I like the Bengals to win and cover because I just don't think it matters. Again, Texans and Steelers both win and cover. And I think it makes much more interesting Super Bowl playoff matchups. You know, a young C.J. Stroud going up against Cleveland, who I think who his draw would be, is very interesting. And again, I think we're definitely seeing Chiefs. We're going to either see Chiefs Tyreek Hill in the second round or Chiefs Bills. So either way, that's going to be an exciting matchup. I tend to think we're going to see the Chiefs versus Tyreek Hill 2.0. You know, we saw the first matchup, obviously. But to me, they've been kind of teasing that rivalry for a while, so I've been keeping my eye on that one. And unless something crazy happens, the NFC, it's looking like it's going to be Rams-Lions. And I had gone into why it just made sense to me because, again, you have Stafford against his old team with his new team, and then Goff, who just happens to be former Ram, and he's on the Lions. So you have the team swapped quarterbacks, and now they're playing each other, and it just seemed too good. They were talking about, can you imagine if Flacco matches up against the Ravens, which it's looking like is going to happen at some point. And it got me thinking of quarterbacks. And I talked about this like a month ago, about how the Rams, Lions made sense for that reason. And they haven't mentioned it yet, but I'm already waiting for it, because basically these teams are locked in to play each other. It would take a lot of things happening for them to draw different seeds. So I'm just waiting for the ESPN YouTube channel and all that to put out, it's Goff against the Rams and Stafford against the Lions, and they show us pictures from 2008. They do that shit all the time. It's so predictable. So, yeah, I think both teams just hold their spots. So, in this game, the Lions, I think it makes sense that they would cover. And it would also fulfill another preseason prophecy. A few people said I was just hating on the Vikings, even though most people know my channel. I go into it being pre-rehearsed and there's no teams I like or dislike. But I went into how I thought the Vikings were going to have the worst record in the division. That is on record. It's one of my earlier videos where I go into the Lions and why they're an easy bet to get over 9 wins. But the reason I liked it was because Vegas had the Packers, Lions, and Vikings basically in a 3-way race with the Lions having a slight edge. Coming into this year, there's no reason that Vegas should have thought that, because I don't care what people say. There's not a lot of people who genuinely thought the Lions were going to be good coming into this year. A lot of people are still on the Vikings. And to have the Packers, who really, they're doing a rebuild, up there with them just told me all I needed to know. And the Bears were not that far behind. So I think it makes perfect sense that the Bears finish off the season with a win. They're trying to push Fields. So you can see a lot of these stories seem to be like contingent on each other. But yeah, a Lions win and a Bears win means the Vikings finish last in the division. Again, you get talk behind Fields. And what's more interesting is I went into this. The Bears are basically undefeated since CM Punk returned to wrestling. So The Rock just returned. We'll have to see how the Dolphins do, right? Although The Rock, he reps as many cities as there are ramen noodle flavors. That guy, wherever he's at, that's the city he's from. When he's from Philly, when he's in Philly, he's from Philly. The guy, I'm sure you guys seen him lying about In-N-Out Burger. He's become pretty much a meme for his pathological lying ability. But either way, Rock reps Miami. I had gone into earlier this year how Tua, there's like this unspoken bond between Samoans that if you're a Samoan, you're family. And The Rock went into this, and we see what's going on in wrestling, a lot of foreshadowing, the whole Samoan bloodline. And Tua's having a great year for Miami. So I'm waiting for The Rock to come out and say something for Tua about Tua. I think that's going to happen for sure. So I got my eyes on Miami. I'm not saying they're going to make a run, but I'm more open to them than I was, especially in this season finale. I think a Dolphins win makes a lot of sense, to be quite honest. And I'll be going into, exact numbers, exactly who we're picking, all that stuff, as I always do. But I thought there's so many narratives, I just wanted to cover the narratives aspect. So I'm still giving you who I like. I like the Dolphins to cover, but I also like it to be concise and, I guess, organized. So I'll go through a pick'em, a pregame pick'em. But I wanted to go into the narratives as to why I like these teams. I could be way off with the Bears. It's just really weird to see them suddenly winning, and it just happens to be since, again, Punk returned. Like, to put in perspective, they have, I want to say, the best record in football outside of like a team or two since Punk returned. They're like 5-1 or some shit. Like they haven't lost. It might be like 4-1, but he hasn't been back that long. But starting with the week he came back, they won every game except one. So I just find that interesting. And like I say, I think wrestling definitely copies. You see Pat McAfee and The Rock together, like best friends now. I guess Pat McAfee's the new Kevin Hart. And they're cutting promos. They're with Deion Sanders. And now, again, Rock returns. I consider him Miami, even though, again, he reps everywhere. He's technically born in California. He's from Hawaii. He reps Miami the most. That's where he played college. That's where he does a lot of his speeches for. And he'll call Miami home, even though, again, he does it with like 5 places. It's like the kid in high school that was like, oh, I'm from, the Bronx or some shit. And like, half the kids in school had to rep a certain city, even if they weren't even from there. Oh, I'm from White Plains, New York, but I'm from the Bronx, whatever. That's the kind of shit The Rock does. It's very, in my opinion, very childish and adolescent-like behavior, but it's just the way the guy is. The guy's unsufferable. And I say this as somebody who used to like The Rock. I think a lot of people used to like The Rock, and then they just heard him talk a little too much, and it's like, okay, this guy's got something a little loose up there. He's as far as, again, the things he'll go and lie about is comical at this point. How out of touch he is. But anyway, I don't want to bash The Rock the whole video. I just do find the return very interesting. Very last game is going to be Bills-Dolphins. So again, I got my eyes on that. And I went into that earlier this year, the Dolphins specifically, because of the Samoan connection. Wrestling's big in Florida too, so there's a lot connecting these teams, in my opinion. Rams-Niners, I think it makes perfect sense for the Rams to win. They hold their seed, and they match up perfectly with the Lions. I think even with a Niners win, not too much would change for the Rams, but I think then they could get outed by a good bit of these teams. I'm not positive. I haven't ran through the exact simulator, but I think they would get outed by like the Packers or something if they lose and the Packers win, something to that effect. So anyway, even though I have the Bears winning, because I think it makes much more sense, like I said, I think them finishing out strong, I still think the Rams are going to win, look pretty formidable, secure that spot. Not to mention money's going to be all over San Francisco. After that beatdown, they returned the favor and looked amazing. So I think more public will be on San Francisco. And I went into that too. The final week of the season, I think we're going to start seeing, now, granted, the Niners already clinched, so I get they might not have all their stars out, but you could still have an injury to the offensive line or something and just push that they're not firing on all cylinders, which is exactly what I think they're going to push. Try and get people to doubt Purdy going into the playoffs. That's what I think makes the most sense. So I like the Rams in that matchup, which also, like I said, coincidentally sets up Lions-Rams, which would be a nice matchup in itself. Dolphins win, I think. Bills get into the playoffs, probably match up against. I think they would draw the Texans, if I'm not mistaken, if the Bills get in as a wild card. And the Dolphins would draw the Browns, or it might be flipped. Or I think the Texans might draw. I think they might draw each other, to be honest. I haven't, like I said, I haven't looked at the simulator this week, but I do remember a few scenarios where they were playing each other in the first round, so a lot can happen. But I think it makes sense the Dolphins win this game, so I like the Dolphins to win. Really just trying to cover the playoff games here. Eagles, I'm not too sure about that yet, to be honest. Commanders, Cowboys, not too sure about that one yet. Chiefs, Chargers, I think Chargers, just so they can say the Chiefs have a terrible record. And they always give away some type of, if you remember, like they give away little bits of numbers in plain sight. I do remember Nick Wright predicting that the Chiefs were going to go 17-0, so they could go 10-7, the same numbers he had, and I could see them pulling something like that. So between the line, the story, and Nick Wright, I love the Chargers here to win and cover this game. Seahawks, Cardinals. I think just because of the line again, there's going to be more people on the Cardinals here. Seahawks fighting for on the Seahawks. And you have the Seahawks fighting for a playoff berth. I don't think they can get in. I think they're mathematically eliminated. And at this point, again, I think the Cardinals just beat the Eagles, so you could say that money might be on them. At the end of the day, I think a lot of these guys are just trying to push a quarterback going into next year. So I think Arizona's going to push Kyler, just like the Bears are pushing Fields. Love already looked pretty good for the Chargers, for the Packers, I mean. Obviously, the rest of these teams have their quarterbacks in order. But you notice a lot of them just coming in and looking pretty good. Even freaking Browning for the Bengals, even though he's not going to be their guy. It's like they're trying to establish a good bit of quarterbacks. And then we got Bucks Panthers. This one's an interesting one because from the beginning of the year, I liked Carolina at the very beginning because I really thought they were going to do something with Bryce. And then I started liking the Falcons because I really thought they were going to push the Bijan Robinson story just because they're saying running backs are expendable. So if he could be the reason that his team clinches the division, that could be a pretty big deal. But I do admit that the Bucks and the Saints are bigger draws. And I don't know, I know there's a lot of history between the Bucks and the Eagles, and they would match up against each other. So I think the Bucks would cover this game. I think that makes sense. And between them and the Saints, you both have draws, of course, but I don't think they're quite ready to push the Saints yet. The Bucks have been getting a soft push all year long, specifically Baker. So yeah, I think the Bucks would win this game. Now, whether they cover, I'm not positive. I'm going to go into that in another video. Like I said, a lot of these games, last week we got a couple wins without the cover. And with some of the metrics, I do like wins on certain games, but not the cover. Again, for this Panthers game, it makes sense that the Panthers might cover but not win. And then other ones too, like this Jags-Titans game. I like the Jags to definitely win. I do like them to cover, but I could see it going the other way. So, for the most part, yeah, I mean, those are all of our picks. Don't got the Broncos-Raiders yet. Not really sure, honestly. Some of these games I don't have a great read on, so I just figured I'd go into the ones where they have direct playoff ramifications. So Chiefs-Chargers again, because of Nick Wright, I do like the Chargers. And then, obviously, the Rams to win makes sense. I think Dolphins win makes sense. I think Bears win makes sense because of the CM Punk thing. So we got a good bit of underdogs winning, which is nice. Again, I think the Cardinals will sneak a win here. To me, it makes sense the Bucks and Saints both win. And then I think the Bucks would get the tiebreaker. I know the Saints just beat them, but I think they're 1-1 against each other. But either one of those teams makes sense, to be honest. I think the Bucks make a little more sense. Jets Patriots don't have much of a read on. I maybe lean Patriots just because they can't get the first pick anyway. So the Jets would just get a better pick in the draft, and that would get fans hyped up. Lions, just because then the Vikings have the worst record, I think that's going to happen. So the Bears don't. Bengals, because the spread, So again, they're not all playoff ramifications, but most of them are. And then again, back to our first two. Steelers, I think they win and cover, and same with the Texans. So I don't want to go all over the place, but I just wanted to cover a lot of interesting narratives that are popping up. I think we're going to see a lot of these quote rivalry games and different types of matchups that guys versus their old team. They're already talking about it in a bunch of different games, so I think that stands to reason. And like I said, I'll have an official exact cover for probably all these games. I'll probably cover them all. Probably Friday or something of that nature. I always like to get exact picks out. This is more so just to run through the playoffs and the teams that I have getting in, and just to make it clear, I went into the AFC side already. I like Baltimore. This is all to make the playoffs. Houston, Cleveland, obviously Cleveland. Jacksonville, I think, gets in, and then Bills, Dolphins, Chiefs. On the NFC side, I am going to go with Bucks. Bucks or Saints, to be honest. I really don't, but I'll say Bucks. Lions. I think the Rams do get in. Obviously the Eagles, the 49ers, the Lions, and the Cowboys. So I personally, those are my picks. Of course, I'm not saying they're going to be exact, but I do think the Rams locking makes sense. I've been very much against the Steelers and Colts getting in the playoffs basically all season. I think they've been red herrings all year. That's why I like the Texans and the Ravens so much. Well, I think Pittsburgh's going to win, like I said, but I just don't think that they're going to get in. I think it's going to wind up being the Texans and Jags. But as far as the Super Bowl, still like the Ravens-Niners. I know a lot of people are telling me it's obvious. Maybe it is, but again, we got a pretty obvious Super Bowl last year. I think almost any of these teams outside of, if it was like the Rams versus the Browns or something, I think almost all of these matchups would be considered obvious. The Chiefs are always going to be obvious because we got Patrick Mahomes. The Bills are going to be, quote, obvious. And then the NFC side, I feel like people would call the Eagles, Cowboys, or Niners obvious. So it really depends on how you look at these teams. But I'm not too subscribed to that theory, just because, again, I think if anything, it makes sense. They know how many people think it's rigged. It would kind of make sense that you give people a realistic Super Bowl, kind of like we got last year, but there happened to be a bunch of stories in between. We see Harbaugh's in the news again, so obviously reminds people of the Blackout Bowl. So, yeah, I still like Niners, Ravens. I'll go into that, though. Like I said, at the end of the week, I'll have an official... Well, I'm going to have our picks out, of course, but going into next week, I'm going to have every single playoff matchup and who I think is going to win. I think we have the matchups already, though, to be quite honest. I think who we're predicting is going to be who matches up. So I don't think too much is going to change. But, of course, in the chance that it does, then I'll have whatever matchups that we are presented and who I think is going to win them. And I think we'll do good. We had a good playoffs last year. I think a lot of the matches made sense. I think I had the Bengals going further than the Chiefs, but I'll say once the Chiefs made it, I think we all knew they were going to beat the Eagles. But for the most part, we were pretty over the target, and I feel like that'll be the case this year. We could already see some rivalries developing, so we'll see what happens. And I'm curious to see, like I said, if The Rock's tied in with this at all. It's an interesting return. Obviously, they showed it all over ESPN. Whenever The Rock returns, it's on ESPN, so it should be an interesting couple months going forward watching wrestling and the NFL both run their respective, like I said, their big showcases. They got the WrestleMania and the Super Bowl. So yeah, let me know what you think. If you think there's a chance the Colts get in or something like that, or you think there's going to be a different team, maybe the Jags don't get in, I'm not sure. Or maybe you think the Seahawks get in instead of the Rams. Whatever you think, just let me know. I always appreciate everybody. I want to say Happy New Year. Obviously been a little busier, but wanted to get out basically all the narratives that I like and basically touch on every game this week. Like I said, I'll be doing a definite on my spreads and such, but basically we covered every game in this video. But I always do updates in case there's something I missed or there's a certain spread that I just feel like is a little suspicious, or if it moves, obviously I like to touch on them before the game. But yeah, honestly, my favorite games are almost in order because the first 2 games on Saturday are like my favorite games of the weekend. I think the Steelers and the Texans are some pretty safe picks to take, just because, again, the Ravens win, the Steelers are basically out immediately, which, again, I don't think the Steelers are going to get in, but I think they're going to at least keep it alive long enough for the Texans to play and then the Jaguars to play the next day. And Texans, yeah, there's no way in hell Gardner Minshew is getting in the playoffs. I'm sorry. The guy's not a draw. He's just not. There's no way they're going to give the Colts, in my opinion. If they had Richardson, sure. But there's no way they put Gardner Minshew in over C.J. Stroud. I just don't think they'll do that. So, yeah, I love those games. And the rest of them I like too. I just like them too more because they have direct playoff ramifications. So take care, everybody, and happy earnings.